On today's episode, we discuss how allowing Bibles in schools would solve all criminal activity in the United States, how Jesus' ministry of healing was really just a morning star for the political framework of socialism, a brave pastor celebrating Biden's victory in deep blue Seattle, and the tried and true Christians cannot be libertarian. This is Cringe Posts. Welcome to this episode. I'm Donald.
And I'm Britt.
And we're here to take on the online takes that make you cringe. But before we take on other people's bad takes, we gotta go through our own. And so we've got a doozy for you this week. Look at that absolutely stunning picture of Britt. Do you want to fill us in?
Yeah. So for those of you who are listening, for those of you watching, you need no explanation. But for those of you listening, it's me standing in some sort of camp bathroom, and I've got a V-neck on that goes past my belly button, and it's titled "The Deepest V." And the background on this, I think I was 16, and back then, as you can tell by my hair, emo stuff was all the rage, and we always wore V-necks, and the joke amongst the group was like, well, who could have the deepest V? And so I bought this shirt, and I cut a deepest V into it, and I thought I was so cool wearing it around because I out-V'd all the other V-neckers, and it's just incredibly embarrassing because what it says is it just shows you how narcissistic and lame I was back then, even though I thought I was so cool. Oh my gosh.
I have to admit, I sort of reflexively, I'm like, oh, I'm not wearing a V-neck right now. Just like
V-necks are fine. They're not meant to go to just show your whole body like that.
Yeah,
like an immodest person.
Right? Yeah, that's some level of modesty. Well, I have to appreciate it just because. You and I went to college together, and I'm pretty sure I saw people wearing these kinds of V-necks unironically sometimes on
Yes.
stage, So
That's true. Yeah.
You
and they're in their 20s, so I mean,
yeah.
I get a little bit of grace for being in my teens, but
yeah.
It's funny. My dad told me because I had my hair super duper long, and he's like, dude, you're gonna think that looks stupid when you grow up. And I was like, no way, no, I'm not gonna. And here I am. I'm not even that far grown up, and I think it looks stupid. So, Dad, good work. You are a prophet.
Yeah. My dad just didn't let me grow my hair out long. I wanted to, and he's just like, no.
Hey, he did you a favor.
Yeah, he did. It's funny because, I mean, it's nothing novel. I'm not like, I'm not Einstein revealing the most unknown truths to mankind, but really, even in environments that are not super high pressure, the level of social pressure amongst teens and kids is wild.
Yeah.
And to draw the larger implication of it is I think a lot of people don't grow out of that. And so many of the cringe posts that we look at, I think, stem from following the crowd without thinking through things yourself necessarily. And so, I don't know, it's just kind of funny because it's like, we're all susceptible to it, but the difference is at some point you have to grow out of it, you have to grow out, take off the deepest V and like realize, you need to define your own fashion sense. All right, well, we'll move on to our quick cringe section, starting with Bibles aren't allowed in schools anymore, but are encouraged in prison. If kids were allowed to read it at school, they may not end up in prison. Oh
my goodness. This is a nice big boomer meme for sure.
Yes. I think the original meme has the prisoner in the cell holding the Bible for that extra impact,
Yeah. It's the truest case of correlation does not equal causation. Right?
Yeah.
Like there are chairs, they exist, in prison and in school, or it's like smoking's allowed in prison, but it's not allowed in schools. So if kids smoked, they might not end up in prison. It's like, well.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, neither of us are very fond of public education. I think that there's enough evidence to show the declining standards, the horrible social environment that they've provided. As Michael Malice says, it's for many, if not most people, the only place in their life where they will encounter physical violence. And to somehow think that these are the institutions that should be trusted to manage teaching Bibles in school is such an absurd idea. I don't think that Bibles being allowed in school just on their own, like, Timmy going to school and cracking open his Bible and reading a verse, I don't think that is going to avert him from going into a lifestyle that leads him to prison necessarily. And I don't think that if Bibles are being promoted by the secular institution of public education, they're going to be presented in a fair way that saves those people, the kids, from the same path. It does not at all strike me that you get one with the other there.
What's in like, as funny as this meme is, the kind of terrifying consequence of it is this weird abdication of responsibility, right? Like, the way you keep Timmy out of prison is make him a better person, have good role models in his life, have people that invest in him and encourage him towards, whatever path he needs to be on. And these type of posts and stuff, what they are is just saying, well, like, I don't want to have the responsibility, and we pay our tax dollars to the school, so it should be their responsibility, so they should have Bibles. And that's kind of like the slope that you get on when you start saying that, well, because we pay for public school, they need to do this or do that. Obviously, you and I agree. It's like, I don't want, abolish the Department of Education, but least of all, if we can't trust them to make kids better people, there's definitely not going to be a chance that they're going to be able to teach the Bible adequately or use it in such a way that it transforms people's lives, right? That's the power of the Bible and the gospel, is that when it's paired with a person's personal experience with it, and then that truth is spoken in another person's life with love and truth and all that, then it does transform people. But that is a bit too high of a bar for the public education system to clear.
Right. And if we want to give benefit of the doubt, I think there are some principles here that aren't totally off the mark. For instance, I don't think public education system should be punitive toward people expressing their faith. I think in the modern day education system, oftentimes kids can be penalized for expressing a Christian belief that would come from the Bible. But again, I think the issue there lies with the public education system and the school, not the fact that they don't allow Bibles in there. Because if they allowed Bibles, then they might allow that kind of speech, but I do think teachers would still berate their students for expressing a traditionally Christian viewpoint if they didn't like it, if they didn't agree with it, because it went against the cultural norms of the day. So, yes, I don't like that schools are hostile to Christianity, but I don't think that it's because Bibles aren't allowed in school. That it's like taking one of the minor byproducts of maybe the major problem and then putting all the blame on that. In the same way that it's like, they're encouraged in prison. If kids weren't allowed to read it, maybe they wouldn't end up in prison. And it's like, or maybe if we didn't arrest a lot of nonviolent offenders and decriminalized a lot of victimless crimes, we wouldn't have people reading the Bible in prison either, So, all right, but moving to our next quick cringe, we have a classic meme, that impact font. Then Jesus said, "I can't heal you for free. That's socialism."
Oh my goodness.
And this might be the purest example of cringe meme. I mean, this is it. We've peaked with this meme right here, because not only is it's not funny or witty, it's the lowest hanging fruit in terms of, I'm going to criticize your viewpoint. I'm going to fundamentally misunderstand what the idea of voluntarism, what socialism is, and what Jesus' ministry was, all in one take. And it just makes you like, oh, grow up.
There's another meme that's kind of like the antithesis of this, where it's like, telling the rich young ruler, like, sell all you have and go give it to the poor. It's like, but Jesus, why can't we just give it to the government, or have our government take it from our neighbor and give it to the poor? It's like, it's a fundamental misunderstanding, right? Like, Jesus calls people to be self-sacrificing as an individual. And if you're not doing that, then, because Jesus' ultimate goal, right, is for us to become more like him. And the way we do that is by living a self-sacrificing life, not by demanding that our neighbors live a self-sacrificing life.
Right.
The other part, and you and I've talked about this a bit before, but like, I can't heal you for free. It's like Jesus, it wasn't free, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of the gospel. Nothing Jesus did was ever free. Someone bared the cost for it, and because he's the Messiah, he bears the cost for it, right? Like grace and salvation is free to us, but it cost him, unending agony. And I'm sure, healing people, it cost resources. He had to be funded by people, and go for it. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, Scripture clearly says that after he heals people that he has to go and rest. That's why, after doing miracles and feeding people and all the different things, he retreats on the boat, for instance, before calming the storm, or feeding the 5,000. He goes to isolation to rest, and there are specific accounts of him being tired from exerting effort and healing people. But again, it's like you said, it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of the gospel. He wasn't doing these things and saying, now look, follow my example in a government structure that you have to provide these services for free. He said, no, you go out and do good things. And so as a Christian, yes, I am called to help people the best I can. Now, I'm not a physician, so I can't go out and heal people, but I can support charities and local organizations that do. But that is a completely different, that's a voluntary action of my own accord because I am called to that through Christ. It is not the same as me supporting a regulation that would require everyone's income being pooled and then have the government take it away. If anything, I'm abdicating my responsibility to do the work of finding an organization I support that will help take care of people, or even worse, abdicating the responsibility of helping people in my immediate life who need my physical help. Whether that's my neighbor next door who I see is struggling and I can bring a meal over, or it's the homeless person who's like in the middle of the road because they're, crazy, and you can help them out of the street. When you go to this, these lengths of Jesus advocated socialism, you just see how far removed it was from Jesus's actual ministry of being physically there and doing the sacrificing your own comfort and well-being and safety and energy for people.
Yeah, and the point, it's like you were saying earlier, this is like a low dig. This person, whoever posts these type of things, they're trying to say, well, Christians, like, they hold this high moral ground, but they're actually just awful, right? Because they don't want to give this and such to the poor. It's like, dude, statistically, churches and conservatives give way more to private charity than any person on the left, and both religious and secular charities. And, to top that off, private charity is infinitely more effective at actually doing good for the people that your dollars go to than any sort of government program. So if you want to look at it from just a pure, utilitarian standpoint, what gets the result, it's like, yeah, being a Christian is actually way better because you're more likely to donate to a charity, and then the dollars that you do donate are more likely to actually do the good that you mean them to do. And it's just, like you're saying, it's just so lowbrow and just nasty. It's a nasty thing to do this because it fundamentally and maybe intentionally misunderstands the point of the gospel at at the expense of what the actual hope that it's offering. I think about like Jesus, and like he came in and everyone wanted him to be a king. Like they were like, hey, I want you to be a king. I want you to be a revolutionary. I want you to go out, kill all the Romans, and then institute the government that we think it needs to be. Even some of his disciples thought that. And he was like, no, that's not what I'm here to do. Like, my kingdom is not of this earth. And so he comes in, he heals for free at his own expense. And he's like, I want to make people better people. And very apparently the best way to do that was not by becoming king. It was by leading people and, telling people the good news and helping them, realize who they were internally and making them to a better, leading to a better place. And it's what's so unfortunate. This person's never cracked open the Bible, or they either never cracked open the Bible or they're willfully ignorant of it. And they're just using this as a baton to bash people over the head and get a few claps on social media.
Yeah. And what I would say to add to all this is, I'm not even necessarily saying that a socialist healthcare system is anti-Christian. I think that you can make arguments for that, and I would say in general you want to help the most people you can through the best ways you can, and I think so much of the principles that Jesus teaches lead me to what my political worldview is. But I would also say if you're living somewhere with a socialized healthcare system, say you're living in Canada, say you're living in Denmark or something, not that those are socialist countries in the technical term, but with socialist healthcare systems, it's not to say you can't be a Christian. But if I were there, I would also advocate, well, let's make the best healthcare system we can. And you know how you do that? You turn it capitalist.
Yep.
So, because I want to help people. So I'm hard pressed to find Jesus specifically saying this is how you need to set up your government structures and your, national healthcare system. I don't read that personally, but I'm not reading the message, so maybe that's why. I don't know. Okay.
That's some inside Christian baseball right there.
Yeah. Okay. Next quick cringe we've got. Oh yeah, this is a good post. Hi, Christian or otherwise religious person out there who doesn't like Trump starred out, for those of you listening, Trump, and wants to celebrate, but because of their role in church, their pastor watching, or their parents and family, they feel like they can't share their true political opinions because there is so much pressure from these around you to be a certain way and believe a certain thing. I see you. You can DM me and I will celebrate with you.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, this is just freaking Nazi Germany where you couldn't have a Bible and, you're all scared that people are going to come find you. And to kind of provide some context for this person is writing from Seattle, which King County, the most liberal county in one of the more liberal states out there, where basically if you walk down the street with a MAGA hat on, you'd be lucky if you didn't get eggs thrown at you, in that scenario. And that's what's so ironic about this is this person lives in the heart of probably the safest place to be a liberal in the country. Mm-hmm. And they just can't help it. They've got to be the hero. They've got to be the person that's on the side of the resistance and, helping out the closeted liberals in their liberal city. And it's just such a cringe virtue signal. And then the star over the U so that we don't know that it's Trump, but it actually is. So that they're able to signal that, oh, I know this is an offensive name. It's just, ugh.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny to me that they're because of their role in the church or their pastor watching or their parents and family and stuff like that. Like, I'm going to be your savior in this scenario. And you're like, would you really? I don't know. I mean, I know there are people who would berate or get mad at someone for celebrating this kind of thing, but imagine elevating the celebration of Joe Biden over getting rid of Trump. Like, and again, this is targeted toward religious people where it's like, I don't think I think for instance, like if Ron Paul were elected president, I would probably celebrate, but like this is all done from this, position of like Trump is this evil emperor who we've defeated and now the good guys can finally reign. And then you like look and it's Biden and you're like, really, this is the guy you want to celebrate taking over? The guy
Skywalker.
Yeah, the guy who instituted all of the racist policies that you complain about. Like, I don't know. It's just if you're celebrating Trump being defeated, I think it's just like, okay, you're probably in the mainstream. You're probably not going to be that persecuted in general, let alone Seattle.
And, as Christians too, like this just shows where this person's faith is, if that makes sense. Like their faith is in government. It's in some other leader being able to legislate morals. And when the good guys are in, according to their ideology, then yay. When the good guys are out, then everything is bad. And it's like, any Christian should look at the political spectrum, and be like, well, yep, this person's in. I'm going to continue living my life and loving people the way that Jesus called me to. But yeah, just like, I don't know. And this goes both for conservatives and leftists, right? Like there were people saying that Trump is like handpicked by Jesus and stuff like that.
Gee,
and it was just, it was so cringy. Like, so this goes for both sides of it. And what makes it cringy is the misplaced faith. It's like, man, you're supposed to be about Jesus. Like Jesus is king, not Trump, not Biden, not any of these people. And your faith in these temporary leaders, Biden might have another year in him, that bag of bones. It's like that's temporary, right? It's just unbefitting of a Christian to have so much stock in a system that they feel like they need to celebrate it, and then on top of it, virtue signal to other people. What's funny about this post too, man, like I wish we could show it, but like underneath this post, literally like 30 comments of people doing the little clap emoji and being like, "Oh, I stand with you." It's like, okay, so obviously it's not that scary of a thing to have that you would, you'll post it to everyone in your network, to see.
Yeah. Well, and the last thing I'll say is the very targeted, like the person, because of their role in the church. I mean, my thought is if your role in the church prevents you from celebrating this, which I think is legitimately fine. Like if I were called to take a role in a church, I would probably scale back my political posting to some degree, because that can be divisive. And if your role in a church, generally you're trying to not alienate people over things that are not as high up, right? In the same way that like my religion is going to trump my political views. If that's my role is somewhere in the church, the political, insofar as it doesn't, intersect with my religion, is gonna drop way lower. And so the idea that she's like appealing to political people within the church, like this pastor who's like, oh, I can't, I'm afraid because of my congregation to celebrate Brian, but yeah, like that, the pastor doing that shouldn't even want to message this person and DM in private for that kind of thing. Like, at most you should pray and you can thank God if that's what you want to do for the outcome, but then get back to your duties of being a leader for the church and preaching God's word. And if there's some conflict between God's word and the political, opinion you want to celebrate, maybe you need to reconcile why that is. Yeah. So, all right. And for our long form cringe, we have an interaction on Twitter here. So, the initial reply is talking about to someone who talks about Christianity and libertarianism, and it starts with, honestly, a Christian worldview is absolutely compatible with libertarianism. Not sure a particular denomination has much of a leg up on any other. And then a quote retweet comes in saying, libertarians have apparently never read what Scripture says on government, and cites Romans 13, 1-7, Titus 3:1, 1 Peter 2, 13-15. And then there's some more exchanges, and then it leads to this person who cites those verses as, is taxation theft? And the original poster saying, it's more like extortion. And then the reply, so Christians are conscience bound to pay robbers, and then cites some more verses, which we'll go through. And so we're clear, the Romans 13 verse and the Titus and the Peter, it talks roughly about governments and how God has appointed rulers to enact justice in this world and whatnot. Before we get into sort of the broader topic, we'll just take a look at this end bit about him saying that if you believe that taxation is extortion, we're conscious bound to pay robbers, because that on its own is just a quick cringe, because it's such a bad take. It's the perfect example of cherry picking scriptures where they want. So we'll look and we'll see. I think we've got, so we've got Romans 13, 1-7. This incorporates everything that he cites originally, as well as in some of the later bits here. Romans 13. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one thing in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one who in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of the possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants, who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. We'll move to the next verse that he cites, Titus 3:1. Remind the people to be subject to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready to do whatever is good. And then 1 Peter 13, 13-15. Submit yourselves, for the Lord's sake, to every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and commend those who do right. For it is God's will that they, by doing good, you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. And then lastly, Ezekiel 22:7. Father and mother are treated with contempt in you. The sojourner suffers extortion in your midst. The fatherless and the widow are wronged in you. So, just to address the last bit, he makes this bizarre link between extortion or pay taxes. We're commanded to pay taxes in Romans 13:6, and then in Ezekiel 22 he says that the sojourners suffer extortion in your midst, and the fatherless and widows are wronged in you. And so he's saying, well, since you're saying taxation is extortion, and extortion is defined as, sojourner and father, the widows are wronged in you, you're saying that we have to accept extortion, or we have to accept robbers. And it's like, just because the word is used in different contexts, and the word extortion isn't even used in other translations. It was just in this ESV translation. It's such a weak link to say that you can believe that taxation is extortion, and then also that you shouldn't resist taxation by God's authority. Like, that's not incompatible. And you can also say that extortion in different contexts you can resist. Like, if you're being robbed in the street, and because they're offering, like, I'm going to give you this moldy piece of bread, but you're going to have to pay for it, also I'm going to shoot you. You don't have to say that because in one verse taxation is linked in, and because taxation is extortion, you have to accept all extortion. That's such a weird link, and it makes no sense if you look back at this original post where he says Christians are conscience bound to pay robbers because it's defined as extortion. Absolutely bizarre. I don't know if you have any particular thoughts on that tail end of it before moving into the bigger topic or not, but
yeah, not on the tail end. I mean, that's just a really weird take.
Yeah, it's just an exact or a perfect example of taking a single verse and then linking it to other verses that are completely unrelated in context, and then saying, because they use this word here, that means that in every single context of the word you have to hold to the exact same meaning, and it's just a silly argument that can be rejected outright.
Yeah. So moving to the Romans 13, and a lot of Christians use this as we need to submit to the authorities. I think there's a few points to propose on this, right? Where I think in all of these verses that are mentioning submitting to authorities, the command that supersedes that is what is good, right? Be ready to do whatever is good, because obviously, right? Like, you would never say, hey, I know Nazi Germany gets brought up a lot, but like, you would never say Nazi Germany is the governing authorities, let's submit to them and turn in the Jews. Obviously, that's not in line with the heart of the gospel.
Right.
And then two, I think about the in Samuel, when the people have kind of like they were living under kind of more or less what we would call like an anarcho-capitalist society, where they have judges that kind of arbitrate these different things in different communities and all that sort of thing. And the people are, over time it works, but then at the end, people start sliding into moral decay. And these people are like, no, like, Samuel, the prophet, you need to give us a king, because then a king is going to be able to tell us how to live and mandate all this different stuff. And Samuel talks to God, and Samuel go, hey, like, don't do that. Like, you guys need to learn to be good people on your own. Like, that's the only way you'll ever have the society that you want. That's the only way you'll ever have peace. And if you want to have a king, he's going to rule over you. He's going to oppress you, and fundamentally, you're not going to actually get what you want, but the people continue to demand it, and so then they get a king. They get King Saul, and obviously we see the Israel and the Hebrews diminish ever since. It's a downward spiral ever since they start getting a king. And inherent in that, right, is that we're not supposed to get our morality from the government. We're not supposed to. The government, like I said earlier, is not supposed to make us better people. It's there, and I think about, like, Jesus is so amazing in that there's that one verse, I can't remember where it is, but like the Pharisees are trying to trap him in the conundrum of like, well, who should we pay taxes to, right? Because he had a bunch of followers who were like, we want to get out from under the authority of the government. And then, but they also had the Pharisees that could arrest him if he like started speaking of insurrection against the Roman authorities. And so like, hey, like, who does this, this coin belong to? And Jesus says, he flips it over, he says, whose image is on the coin? And the Pharisees say, oh, well, it's Caesar's. Fundamentally misunderstanding a lot about, like, who Caesar is. And Jesus goes, well, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's. And what's so funny about that answer is that when he flips over the coin, he says, whose image is on it? And they say Caesar. It just shows and reveals to them their fundamental misunderstanding of where their allegiances lie, right? Like, Caesar is made in the image of God. This is an image of a man. Like, in the image of God, we were created, right? And what Jesus is trying to say. He's both answering and not answering their question in a way that doesn't get him arrested, but also puts them on their back feet. And that, like, look, everything belongs to God. This entire world it belongs to the Father, and so everything at the end of the day belongs to Him. So whatever is good, do that.
Right.
And that's, I think, these verses have been used in the past by Christians to justify a lot of awful things, right?
Yeah.
And if we're going to not repeat that mistake, we need to have a different understanding of what this means and not just take it at the face value, but analyze it in the cultural context that it is, as well as within the context of the broader gospel message.
Yeah. And when before I address this verse, when you bring up the render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, it's also just a message of, like, understanding what is truly important in this life. Like, yeah, when you're talking about things of Jesus, he is not concerned with our structures of government to the point that that's why he's on this earth. And when you brought up earlier, they wanted him to be Jesus as king on this earth and to be a political revolutionary. So much of what he's saying is, like, that is not why I'm here. What I'm doing is so much bigger and more important than this, like, small nation state upheaval. Like, that is not the point. And that's another thing with that, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, is like, if that's what matters to you, that's of this earth. Like, who really cares about that? That's not what is important. What's important is doing good above all else. Like you say, render unto God what is God's. And so when you look at things, for instance, this, I think so much of that dispelling of his political revolutionary nature is what Paul is writing of. Is like, don't look at this in the terms of the political lens. When he says, consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment upon themselves. You'd have to, if you read this to mean this is what the state should be set up as, you have to then understand that you are never allowed to rebel against any kind of authority that God institutes in the government whatsoever. And I don't think that's a position that anyone consistently would actually hold. I think by that measure, for instance, you could never justify repealing a government law because that would be rebelling against the authority. I think you could never go against institutionalized slavery. You couldn't go against the 3/5 compromise in the U.S. You couldn't ever turn over those things if the authority that God has instituted in this way means that you have to have this authority and government. Or you can understand that this Romans verse is, again, Paul telling people that God's authority supersedes all this, and this is, yes, pay your taxes because you don't want to get punished and you want to be in good conscience with the society around you. But, Jesus is so much more than that, and I think that's all summed up in verse 7 when he says, "Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes." And it's just one of the four things he lists, like. And so, for instance, for me, that's like, yes, I think taxes are immoral, but I also think I have a moral obligation to pay them in order to not be in bad standing with my neighbors, with my state, with my community, those kinds of things. That does not mean that I can't advocate for a government that barely exists or does not exist. But that also means that that's not what God's calling me to either, is to, uproot the state necessarily. But more importantly, he falls, if give everyone what you owe them. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. Like, paying people what they are owed and what they mean is, to me, is always the more important lesson that is being taught in these verses. For instance, in Titus 3:1, remind the people to be subject to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready to do whatever is good. Not to do whatever is told. You're subject to the rulers and authorities, but be ready to do whatever is good. Don't be ready to do whatever they tell you, necessarily.
It's the previous verse, the end of it in Romans. I'm sorry, I don't mean to derail if you're going on to Peter.
No, go ahead.
What does this sound like, right? Like, if someone does something and you owe them that goods or service, then the ethical thing is to give them that good or service. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. That sounds really, 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 really like a free market, solution, right? Where it's voluntary and people are. If you owe someone something, then you should give it to them. That is what's right, and that's kind of the thread that goes through all these verses: is do what is good and ethical, and that, right? Like, that's written on all of our hearts, as the Bible says, is His righteousness and His morals are written on our hearts, and we know them. And when we disobey them, then that's at our peril. And when we look to some other authority to mandate those, or or we use the authorities' edicts to justify our own sinful desires, then we are evil, right?
Yeah.
We're not living to those principles.
Yeah, and I think, I think there is an important lesson in that if you owe taxes, pay taxes, because I might not think that the government's role is to provide roads, for instance. But if I use the roads and there's a fee there, or like a gas tax or something, I think that there is an important principle in the ethical nature of paying for something that you've used. And so, to me, this seems, again, to be more about making sure that as Christians, we are respecting and cultivating a life of sacrifice and of respecting what you use and what you do and what you not being sort of the so beholden to upsetting this current government authority that you're doing everything to undermine it possible. It's like, no, be a good person, be a good servant, and if that means that you've used this road, pay for it to upkeep it. But this to me, it seems Paul is issuing sort of the disheartened Christians who are fleeing from the persecution by the Romans, that God is sovereign. God has established these things and these rulers. And so, in your own areas, do what is good and submit to the authorities where possible. But he doesn't tell the Roman Christians to submit to the authorities and give up the gospel and stop meeting in secret to, stop gathering in his name like Jesus has commanded us, even though that would be submitting to the authority in that same understanding.
Yeah, and this, like I was saying earlier, this verse in isolation, which is what people generally use it as to justify a lot of awful stuff, is bad. But when you look at it in the context of like Romans 12, literally the chapter before it, they've got the verse that talks about, like, as best as you can, be at peace with everyone, right? And Paul is trying to urge the church that has, like you were saying, living in persecution, to be like, no, like, your job is to be an example, a picture of the coming of Jesus. So you've got to overcome. He literally says it. I've got it pulled up right here in Romans 21. Do not overcome evil with evil, but overcome evil with good, right? And so Paul's saying, like, look, like, this government that you live under is corrupt, it's bad, it's wrong, but you can't be someone that contributes to chaos and anger and hatred. Like, you have to be a shining city on a hill that displays this kind of love and self-sacrifice, and that's kind of more of what the context of all this stuff is. And I see you've got Peter pulled up, so I'll let you.
I think what you're saying flows right into this as well. Submit yourselves to every human authority, for the Lord's sake, to every human authority, whether to the emperor or to the governors, but all, for it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Again, it's more about cultivating your witness to people than it is about acknowledging, you have to set up a government in this way, shape, or form, or you can't, try to reduce government's scope in your lives. It's a matter of not being an angsty, torch down, here's maybe an example. I would say, while it's not nearly at the same level to me as the destruction that happened during Black Lives Matter protests, but maybe these verses are a caution against something like the January 6th insurrection, where they're storming the Capitol because they think they've been cheated and robbed. Yeah. That to me is like, even if the state did rob Trump, which I don't really think it did, but if there was, his election was stolen, I think that's a great example of where perhaps that's the kind of thing that this verse is saying, no, you may be cheated. You're going to be mistreated in this life as a Christian, but submit to the authorities in this state. Now, that doesn't mean you don't fight like heck when it comes to your individual rights and like what I would say is your ability to speak freely and to be a good person and to do good in this life, which I think the government often is stepping in the way of and impeding your ability to do. But it does mean that you shouldn't necessarily go storming in a chaotic way that, because I don't think January 6th silenced the ignorant talk of foolish people. I think it stirred up much more than it silenced.
It ruined, if you were a Christian at that, it ruined your witness, right? And that's what the Lord's concerned with.
Yeah. So I think at, a conservative reading of this at most is, I don't think, incompatible with sort of a monarchist view of the government is instituted, but it can be reduced in scope in every possible way. Because to say that the government in its current form, when he's writing these verses, is doing, punishing wrong and doing, promoting the good. It's just not factually true. And when you look at historic examples of theocracies or theonomies that have been set up, they don't last long, and they get abused. Even John Calvin's theonomy did not last very long and did not work out well. So you can't. So it's also, for me, pretty hard pressed to say that those kinds of governments should be established. So again, most conservative, I'd say a minarchist, and where I lean more of, I see nothing barring an anarcho-capitalist society. I just see that, as a Christian, that's not my primary goal. My primary goal is to honor God and to give people what they are due and to be a witness. That is what I see, that anywhere there is an authority, I should be subject to it. That doesn't mean that I have to establish a governmental authority in the state or advocate for a state where
we're eliminating it. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So, but, some people might disagree with us. And if you do, let us know on our socials. You can find us at Cringe Posts Pod on most socials, or visit our website at cringeposts.com and let us know what we said that made you cringe. But thank you for joining us for this episode, and we will see you on the next one.
Yeah.